Homeless woman returned vampire king's kidnapped son. He opened his wallet. Name your price, she said. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let's get into the story. As Olivia stood there, still gripping the child's hand, she felt a wave of unease wash over her. The man who had introduced himself as Vampire King, or something of that nature, stood before her with an air of absolute power. His presence was overwhelming, like a storm on the horizon, about to break. She could feel the weight of his gaze, and it sent a chill through her spine. Despite the fear, there was a part of her, deep inside, that knew she couldn't back down now. The boy, Prince Adrien, looked up at her with wide, terrified eyes, still clutching her hand as if she was his only lifeline. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, but she couldn't let him go. Not now. She couldn't leave him with this man, no matter how dangerous he seemed. As Olivia followed the Vampire King down the dark, ornate hallway, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle in her chest. Every step she took felt like it was carrying her deeper into a world she didn't understand, a world where danger and power seemed to mingle effortlessly. The boy, Adrien, remained silent by her side, still holding her hand with a grip that was both desperate and fearful. She could feel the weight of his anxiety, and it only made her own nerves worse. She glanced up at the man leading them, trying to keep her expression neutral, but her mind raced with questions. Who was this man really? What did he want from her? Why was his son so important? The Vampire King, whose name she still didn't know, didn't seem bothered by her silence. His stride was confident, his movements smooth and deliberate. His presence was commanding, and even though she was just a few steps behind him, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a mere pawn in whatever game he was playing. They reached a large, wooden door at the end of the hallway, and the Vampire King stopped. He turned to her, his red eyes gleaming with a strange mixture of curiosity and caution. You should understand, he said, his voice deep and calm, that you're no longer just a part of your world. You're in mine now, and in my world, the rules are different. Olivia swallowed hard, her throat dry. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pushed open the door and led them into a lavish room that made Olivia's eyes widen in disbelief. It was a grand chamber, with high ceilings and walls lined with ancient tapestries. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something earthy, like moss. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering light across the room. It was beautiful, but it was also overwhelming, and it only served to remind her how out of place she felt. Adrien tugged on her hand, pulling her attention back to him. His face was pale, his wide eyes still filled with fear. She knelt down beside him, brushing a lock of hair away from his face. Are you okay? She asked softly. Adrien nodded but didn't speak. Olivia's heart ached for him. She couldn't imagine what he had been through. The Vampire King watched them for a moment before speaking again. You've done something remarkable, Olivia, he said, his tone shifting slightly. You've shown more courage than most people ever will. And for that, I owe you something. Olivia frowned, not sure what he was getting at. What do you mean? You're a part of this world now, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. And you're going to stay here. I'll protect you, and I'll make sure you're well taken care of. But you need to understand one thing. Nothing comes without a price. Olivia felt her stomach drop. What price? She asked, though she already had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. The Vampire King didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to stand, his gaze never leaving hers. Come with me, he said, his voice low and commanding. He turned and walked to a large desk in the corner of the room, where a thick stack of papers lay waiting. Olivia hesitated for a moment before standing and following him. Adrien stayed close to her, his small hand still gripping hers. She squeezed his hand in reassurance, but her mind was racing. The Vampire King had just told her she was now a part of his world. And from the way he spoke, it was clear that being in his world wasn't going to be easy. Sit, he commanded once they reached the desk. Olivia sat in the chair he pointed to, and Adrien followed her, climbing into her lap. The Vampire King moved behind the desk, his fingers skimming over the papers in front of him. "You're going to need to understand the stakes here," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "There are people who will do anything to harm you, to harm Adrien. And I'm not going to let that happen." Olivia looked up at him, confusion and fear swirling in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You're not just any ordinary woman, Olivia," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're tied to something far older, something far more dangerous than you realize. The moment you laid your hands on Adrien, you became a part of something that stretches back centuries. And now, you're caught in the middle of it." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket, suffocating and thick. Olivia felt a surge of panic rising in her chest. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. The Vampire King didn't answer right away. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke. "I want your loyalty. I want your trust. And I want you to stay by my side, Olivia. You're going to help me keep him safe. And in return, I'll make sure you're never alone again." Olivia's mind was spinning. The life she had known, the life she had fought so hard to survive, was over. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And now, she had to decide if she was ready to live in this new, dangerous world. Adrien looked up at her, his eyes wide with fear, and for a moment, Olivia didn't know what to say. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into. But one thing was clear: there was no going back. Olivia sat in the grand chamber, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The Vampire King's words echoed in her head, each sentence heavier than the last. "You're no longer just a part of your world. You're in mine now." His offer had been simple enough: stay by his side, protect his son, and in return, he would make sure she was never alone again. But what did that really mean? What kind of life was she stepping into? She had gone from struggling to survive on the streets to being thrust into a world of power, mystery, and danger, with no clear way out. Adrien, still sitting on her lap, was quiet, but his eyes were wide with fear. He had been through so much, and Olivia couldn't help but feel a deep sense of protectiveness for him. She ran her fingers through his hair, offering him what little comfort she could. But as she held him, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to this than she understood. The Vampire King's words had been cryptic, his gaze cold and calculating. What exactly did he mean by "you're tied to something far older, something far more dangerous than you realize"? And why had she been chosen for this role? The questions swirled in her mind, but for now, she had no answers. She had only one thing left to focus on: keeping Adrien safe. The door to the chamber opened slowly, and Olivia turned her head to see the Vampire King step inside. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "We need to talk," he said, his voice commanding and filled with authority. Olivia stood up, Adrien still in her arms, as she met his gaze. "About what?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty bubbling inside her. "About what happens next," the Vampire King replied. "You're a part of this now, Olivia, and you will help protect my son. But there are others who won't be so easily swayed by your presence." He paused, his expression darkening. "There are people who will stop at nothing to take him from me. And they will come for you too, if you're not careful." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what kind of people he was talking about, but the seriousness in his voice made her realize that whatever this was, it was far bigger than her. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I want you to stay by my side. I want you to protect Adrien with everything you have. And I want you to learn about this world. It's a dangerous place, and you need to understand the stakes." Olivia felt a surge of determination rise within her. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she wasn't going to back down. "Not now. I'll protect him," she said firmly. "But I need to know more. I can't just blindly follow you without understanding what's at stake." The Vampire King regarded her for a moment, his eyes studying her closely. "Fair enough," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I'll show you what you need to know." He motioned for her to follow him, and without another word, they left the chamber. As they walked through the winding corridors of the castle, Olivia couldn't help but feel like a small fish in a vast, dangerous ocean. The walls around her seemed to close in, the heavy air thick with secrets. It was clear that the Vampire King wasn't just a man. He was something far older, something ancient. She had already seen glimpses of his power, and she knew there was so much more she hadn't yet understood. They arrived at a large, circular room, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with old, dusty tomes. The room was lit by flickering candles, their light casting long shadows on the stone floor. In the center of the room stood a large table covered with ancient scrolls and maps. The Vampire King gestured for Olivia to sit at the table. "This is where you'll learn," he said. "These are the records of my bloodline, of the ancient powers that protect us. And these," he said, pointing to the maps, "are the lands we must defend. The people who would harm my son, they are not of this world. They are beings from another realm, creatures of darkness and chaos." Olivia sat down at the table, her eyes scanning the room. It was like stepping into a world from a forgotten time, a world that didn't belong in her reality. The Vampire King continued. "They are known as the Inquisitors, a group of fanatical beings who seek to control the supernatural. They believe that my bloodline is the key to unlocking unimaginable power, and they will stop at nothing to capture Adrien and use him for their own purposes." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the situation sank in. She had come to this place to protect a boy, but now she was being thrust into a battle she didn't understand. And the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. The Vampire King turned to her, his gaze intense. "You are not just a bystander in this, Olivia. You are a key player in the protection of this world, and you will fight to keep Adrien safe." Olivia looked down at Adrien, who was still holding onto her tightly. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would do whatever it took to keep him safe. The Vampire King's world had become her world now, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. Olivia's world had shifted in ways she could never have imagined. Just hours ago, she had been struggling to survive on the cold streets, clinging to whatever scraps of hope she could find. Now, she was seated in the heart of a castle, a part of a world she never knew existed. A world of power, danger, and ancient secrets. And at the center of it all was Adrien, the boy who had unwittingly brought her into this chaos. She watched him closely, the boy she had promised to protect. His pale face, though tired, still held a certain dignity that made her heart ache for him. She had no idea what horrors he had been through, but the quiet strength in his eyes told her he was a fighter. A fighter she was going to protect no matter the cost. The Vampire King had been clear. She wasn't just a bystander in this world. She was a part of it now, whether she liked it or not. And while the promise of protection and a life away from the streets had been tempting, Olivia knew there was something far darker lying just beneath the surface. The Inquisitors. The name alone made her blood run cold. She had heard whispers of them from the Vampire King, but what did they really want? And why had they set their sights on Adrien? The questions haunted her as she stood by the window, looking out over the vast lands stretching beyond the castle walls. The Vampire King had told her to stay close to Adrien, to protect him from the threats that loomed, but what did that mean in a world full of creatures and beings beyond her understanding? She didn't have the answers, but she couldn't afford to dwell on them. Not when Adrien was depending on her. The Vampire King's voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "You're thinking too much," he said from the doorway. Olivia turned to face him, startled by his presence. He was standing there, his tall figure framed by the door, his dark eyes studying her. "This is more than just a battle for survival," he continued, stepping into the room. "It's about power, and that's something you'll need to understand if you want to protect Adrien." Olivia's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "You're tied to this world now," the Vampire King replied, his tone cold and calculating. "You may not realize it yet, but you have a role to play in the protection of my bloodline. The Inquisitors want what's mine, and they'll stop at nothing to take it." "And what exactly is it?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking with frustration. The Vampire King took a step closer, his gaze piercing. "It's not just power, Olivia. It's a legacy that goes back centuries. My bloodline is the key to controlling forces you can't even begin to understand. The Inquisitors know this, and they will do everything in their power to bend it to their will." Olivia tried to make sense of his words. A legacy? Powers she couldn't understand? She felt like she was in over her head. "But why me?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Why am I here?" What role do I play in all this? The Vampire King studied her for a long moment before responding. You don't just protect Adrien. You are his protector in ways you can't yet comprehend. Your connection to him runs deeper than you realize. And that connection will be what saves him, and you, from the dangers that await. The weight of his words hit her like a tidal wave. What connection? She had no special powers, no knowledge of this world. She was just a woman who had stumbled into a dangerous situation. But the way the Vampire King looked at her, the way he spoke, made her feel like there was something more to her than she understood. Adrien, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. His voice was soft, but it carried an undeniable weight. You don't have to do this, he said, looking up at Olivia with his wide, innocent eyes. You can leave. You don't have to be part of this. Olivia's heart broke at the sincerity in his voice. He was just a child, lost and scared, caught in a world he didn't ask for. But she wasn't going to leave him. Not now, not ever. She bent down to his level, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly, her voice full of conviction. I promise to protect you, and I will. Adrien's eyes softened, and for a moment, Olivia saw a flicker of hope in them. But the reality of their situation was far from over. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was to come. The Inquisitors were coming, and they were going to bring the fight to their doorstep. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. You've made the right choice, he said, his voice cold but not without approval. But understand this, the path ahead will not be easy. The Inquisitors will come for Adrien, and they won't stop until they have him. And when they do, you'll need to be ready. Olivia nodded, her mind already racing with the possibilities. She didn't know how she would face this new world, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not when Adrien's life was at stake. She would protect him with everything she had, no matter the cost. As Olivia stood in the dimly lit chamber, Adrien's quiet breathing beside her was the only sound that filled the air. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend everything that had happened in such a short amount of time. The Vampire King had given her a role she wasn't sure she was prepared for, and yet, the weight of the responsibility was now hers to carry. The Inquisitors were coming. They wanted Adrien, and they would do anything to get him. Olivia's heart thudded in her chest. She had no choice but to fight. The Vampire King had warned her. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, and she needed to be ready. But what did that even mean? What kind of person was she now? Before all of this, she had been nothing more than a woman struggling to survive. Now, she was entwined in a battle she hadn't asked for, but one she couldn't escape. She looked down at Adrien, who had fallen asleep in her lap, his small form curled up like a child seeking comfort. He had been through so much, and now it was her job to protect him. But how could she protect him from something so dark, so powerful? The Vampire King's words haunted her. You are not just a bystander. You are his protector. Olivia's mind flashed back to the first time she had seen Adrien, the fear in his eyes as he clung to her for safety. That moment had changed everything. She had promised him that she would keep him safe, and she wasn't about to break that promise. But she knew she couldn't do this alone. The Inquisitors were powerful, and no amount of courage could face down an entire army of ruthless beings. She needed help. But where could she turn? Who could she trust in this world of darkness and mystery? As if on cue, the door to the chamber creaked open, and Olivia looked up to see the Vampire King standing there, his figure looming in the doorway. You're thinking too much again, he said, his voice as cold and commanding as ever. Olivia straightened, trying to push her fears aside. I'm just trying to figure out how I'm supposed to protect him, she said, her voice filled with determination. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. The Vampire King stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. The first thing you need to do is stop questioning your place here. You are more than capable of protecting him, but you need to accept your role. The Inquisitors will come. They will test you, and you must pass that test, or everything will be lost. His words were chilling, but Olivia didn't back down. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. The Vampire King moved closer, his dark eyes narrowing. You need to learn how to fight, he said simply. Olivia blinked in surprise. Fight? I don't know how to fight. The Vampire King's lips twisted into a thin smile. That's why I'm here. He extended a hand toward her, and she hesitated for a moment before taking it. He led her out of the chamber and down a long hallway, his steps echoing through the cold, stone walls. As they walked, Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The Vampire King's calm demeanor was unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. They reached a large, open room at the end of the hallway. It was a training room, filled with weapons of every kind, and the walls were lined with ancient symbols that Olivia didn't understand. The air was thick with the smell of leather and iron. "This is where you will learn to defend yourself," the Vampire King said, his voice low and commanding. "You'll need more than just your instincts if you want to protect Adrien." Olivia looked around the room, her nerves on edge. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I'm not like you. I'm not some warrior. I'm just a woman who stumbled into this mess." The Vampire King turned to face her, his eyes intense. "You're stronger than you think, Olivia. I've seen it in you. And Adrien believes in you." Olivia looked down at the boy, still sleeping soundly in her arms. His trust in her was unwavering, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm with resolve. The Vampire King gave a small nod of approval. "Good. You have the potential. You just need to learn how to harness it." He motioned toward a set of training dummies at the far side of the room. "Let's begin." Olivia followed his gaze and felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. This was it. This was where she would learn how to fight, how to protect the boy she had promised to keep safe. The Vampire King handed her a wooden practice sword. "Start with the basics," he instructed. "Learn the fundamentals before you take on anything more difficult." Olivia nodded, gripping the sword tightly. She wasn't sure if she could do this, but she knew she had to try. The Vampire King watched her closely as she swung the sword for the first time, the motion awkward and unpracticed. But with each swing, her confidence grew, little by little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Good," the Vampire King said, his voice steady and approving. "Now focus. Remember, every move you make should have a purpose, and every action you take could mean the difference between life and death." Olivia's heart pounded as she continued to practice, her muscles aching, but she didn't stop. Not now. Not when Adrien's life depended on it. Olivia's body ached from the relentless training, but she pushed through. She could feel the weight of the sword in her hand, the grip still foreign to her, but with every passing day, she grew more accustomed to it. Her arms were sore, her legs trembled, but she kept her focus. The Vampire King watched her with an intensity that made her heart race. His presence was both comforting and unnerving, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was always calculating her every move. He had given her no choice but to face this world head-on. Every swing, every practice session, was an effort to prepare for the storm that was coming. The Inquisitors. They were coming for Adrien, and there was nothing she could do to stop them, except to be ready. But no amount of training could prepare her for what was about to unfold. Adrien, who had been quietly watching her practice from the corner of the room, approached her cautiously. His eyes, wide and filled with both admiration and fear, made her heart twist. The boy had been through so much, and now it was her turn to protect him, not just physically, but emotionally. "Are you okay?" she asked, lowering the sword. Adrien nodded, but she could see the uncertainty in his gaze. "I'm scared," he admitted softly. "What if they come for me? What if they hurt you?" Olivia knelt in front of him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Her heart ached for him. He was so young, and yet, he had already seen so much darkness. "I won't let them hurt you," she said firmly, her voice full of resolve. "I promise, Adrien. I will keep you safe." The boy's eyes searched hers, looking for reassurance, and for the first time, she realized just how much responsibility she had taken on. It wasn't just about keeping him physically safe. It was about protecting his heart, his soul, from the damage the Inquisitors would do if they ever got their hands on him. The door to the training room suddenly opened, and the Vampire King stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He had been silent for most of the training, watching from the shadows, but now, he was here, standing before her. "You're doing well," he said, his voice cool but approving. Olivia didn't know how to respond. She wasn't doing well. She was still struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation, but she had no time to doubt herself. "They will come soon," the Vampire King continued, his voice sharp with urgency. "And when they do, we'll need to be ready." Olivia's stomach tightened. How do we stop them, she asked. We can't stop them, he said, his tone low. But we can fight back. You'll need to trust me. She nodded, her grip tightening on the sword again. She had no other choice but to trust him. He had given her no reason to doubt him. But there was still so much about this world that she didn't understand. She had no idea what it meant to fight the Inquisitors or what kind of forces they wielded, but she had seen enough to know that they were not like any enemy she had ever faced. The Vampire King moved closer, his presence overwhelming. The Inquisitors are not like other enemies, he said, his eyes darkening. They don't just come for blood. They come for control, and they will stop at nothing to destroy everything in their path. You will need to be prepared for anything. Olivia looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. I'm not like you. I don't have your strength, your power. The Vampire King's gaze softened slightly, though his expression remained serious. You don't need my strength, he said. You need your own. His words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't have his power, his centuries of knowledge, but she did have something else, a determination that came from deep within her. She had promised Adrien that she would protect him, and she wasn't going to break that promise. She wasn't going to let the Inquisitors tear everything apart. The Vampire King stepped back, giving her space to think. Rest now, he said. Tomorrow, we begin preparing for what's coming. You'll learn more about the Inquisitors and the power they possess. You need to know your enemy if you want to survive. Olivia nodded, though her mind was still reeling from everything that had been said. She needed to understand what the Inquisitors were capable of. She needed to know what kind of battle she was about to face. But as she looked down at Adrien, who was still clinging to her, she knew that no matter what, she wasn't going to let him go. She would fight for him, and if it came to it, she would fight for her life. As the Vampire King left the room, the weight of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just training for a fight. She was training for a war that would determine the fate of the boy she had come to care for, and possibly even the fate of the world they now lived in. She could no longer afford to be weak. She had to be strong. And with that thought, Olivia made a silent vow to herself. She would protect Adrien, no matter the cost. The days following Olivia's intense training had blurred together, each one running into the next with no real sense of time. She had been taught how to hold her ground, how to fight and defend, but nothing could truly prepare her for what was to come. The air in the castle felt heavy, as if it too was waiting for something inevitable to happen. Each night, the feeling of dread would creep in, and she would lie awake, her mind racing with thoughts of Adrien and the Inquisitors. Adrien had become her focus, her reason for fighting. His quiet trust in her was a constant reminder of the promise she had made to protect him. It was a promise she would die to keep. One afternoon, after another grueling training session, the Vampire King called for a meeting. Olivia had become used to his cold, commanding presence. But there was something different about the way he looked at her today. His gaze was hard, almost calculating, as if assessing her readiness for what was coming. We don't have much time, he said as they stood in the grand hall. The room was dimly lit, with shadows stretching across the stone walls. Adrien, who had been by her side as always, looked up at the Vampire King with wide, anxious eyes. The boy hadn't spoken much in the last few days, his fear lingering like an invisible weight. Olivia knelt down beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. It's going to be okay, she whispered softly, though she wasn't entirely sure if she believed it. The Vampire King turned toward them, his expression unreadable. I've done all I can to prepare you, he said, his voice grave. But you must understand, when the Inquisitors come, they won't hold back. They will try to break you, and they will use Adrien against you. Olivia stood, her heart pounding at the weight of his words. What are they after? She asked, her voice tight with fear. The Vampire King's eyes narrowed. They want control. They believe that Adrien holds the key to unimaginable power, a power that they want to harness for their own purposes. They won't stop until they have him, and they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. But how? Olivia asked. How do we stop them? You don't stop them, the Vampire King replied coldly. You survive them. The harshness of his words hit Olivia like a physical blow. Survive. That was all she could do now. Her training, her courage, it wouldn't guarantee victory. It would only guarantee survival. But it wasn't enough. Not when Adrien's life was at stake. The Vampire King continued. The Inquisitors will come for you. You won't know when, but it will happen. You must be prepared, and you must stay close to Adrien at all costs. He is the one they will target first. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Olivia's gaze shifted to Adrien, who looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. She could see the fear in them, and it tore at her heart. She couldn't imagine what it must be like for him, living with the constant threat of danger hanging over him. She could feel his trembling hand grasp hers, and it only fueled her resolve. I won't let them take him, she said fiercely, her voice full of conviction. I will protect him with everything I have. The Vampire King gave a sharp nod. Good. But be warned, when the Inquisitors come, they will stop at nothing. They will twist your mind, use your deepest fears, and manipulate you in ways you cannot even imagine. Olivia steeled herself, pushing the fear down deep inside her. I'm ready, she said, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready for the Inquisitors, for their dark powers, for the way they could tear apart everything she held dear. But she didn't have a choice. She couldn't afford to fail. The Vampire King's expression softened just slightly, though the coldness never fully left his eyes. You mustn't trust anyone, he warned. Not even me. Trust only your instincts and the bond you share with Adrien. That is your strength, and it will be the only thing that will keep you alive. Adrien clung tighter to Olivia's hand, his small body trembling. Olivia knelt down, pulling him close, feeling the weight of her responsibility more than ever before. She would never let the Inquisitors win. She would never let them take Adrien. We'll be okay, she said softly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. The Vampire King stepped back, his eyes scanning the room, as if expecting something to materialize from the shadows. You'll need more than courage to survive this, he said, his voice low and serious. You will need to be ruthless. Olivia nodded, though the words still tasted bitter in her mouth. Ruthless. Could she really become that? Could she abandon everything she had learned about kindness, about compassion, and embrace the dark side of this world? She didn't know. But she did know one thing. She would do whatever it took to protect Adrien. As the Vampire King turned to leave, he paused at the door, casting one last, lingering glance at Olivia. Remember, this is not just a battle for your survival, he said. This is a battle for Adrien's future, and you will do whatever it takes to ensure he has won. Olivia watched him go, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't just protecting a child anymore. She was protecting the future, and she would fight for it, no matter what it cost her. Olivia could feel the tension in the air as she and Adrien made their way through the castle halls. The looming threat of the Inquisitors hung over them like a storm cloud, waiting to break. The Vampire King's words echoed in her mind. You will need to be ruthless. Could she do that? Could she become the kind of person who would stop at nothing to protect Adrien, even if it meant sacrificing parts of herself? As much as she wanted to believe she could do what was necessary, the reality of the situation made her doubt. They were preparing for a battle, but Olivia wasn't sure if she was ready for the cost of it. She couldn't help but look down at Adrien, who was walking beside her, his small hand grasping hers tightly. His innocent face was filled with fear, and it broke her heart. He had no idea what was coming, but Olivia would protect him with everything she had. They reached a large, reinforced door at the end of the hallway. It was the kind of door meant to withstand any attack, and as the Vampire King had said, it was where they would prepare for what was coming. The room inside was dimly lit, and it smelled faintly of leather and steel. A large table in the center was covered with weapons of all kinds, swords, daggers, shields, and even some Olivia couldn't name. The Vampire King stood by the table, his eyes scanning the weapons as though he were assessing each one's potential. This is where you will learn, he said, his voice cold and calm, as if preparing for a war. Olivia stepped inside, feeling the weight of the room's purpose settle over her. Learn what? She asked, her voice tight. The Vampire King turned to face her, his gaze hard. Learn how to fight, how to survive. Olivia's heart pounded. She had been training for days, but the reality of using these weapons in battle felt different than the practice swings she had taken with the wooden sword. The real fight was coming. She could feel it. The Vampire King approached the table and picked up a sharp-looking sword. This is your weapon now, he said, holding it out to her. She hesitated before taking it, the weight of the blade making her fingers tingle. It was heavier than the practice sword, and it felt cold, as if it carried the weight of countless battles. This is no longer about training, Olivia, the Vampire King said, his voice low and intense. This is about survival. The Inquisitors won't give you a chance to hesitate. You need to learn to strike first, to kill if necessary. Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. Kill. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of taking a life. But now, she had no choice. The Inquisitors would come for Adrien, and if she didn't act, he would be taken from her. I don't know if I can do that, she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain strong. The Vampire King's eyes locked onto hers, cold and unwavering. You can. You will. His tone left no room for doubt. Olivia took a deep breath, her grip tightening around the sword. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She had to do this. For Adrien. I will, she said quietly, though she wasn't sure if she fully believed it. Good, the Vampire King replied, his gaze never leaving her. Now, let's see what you can do. He motioned for her to step forward, and Olivia did as instructed, though her heart was racing in her chest. She raised the sword, trying to steady her shaking hands. The Vampire King circled her, his eyes assessing every movement she made. Strike, he commanded. Olivia swung the sword, the blade cutting through the air with a sharp hiss. The motion was clumsy, lacking the precision she had seen in the Vampire King's own movements, but it was a start. Again, he said, his voice demanding. She swung again, this time with more force, but the sword felt awkward in her hands. She wasn't used to it, not like the Vampire King was. But the more she swung, the more she began to feel the weight of the weapon, the power it held. You're getting better, the Vampire King remarked, though his tone was still sharp. But you need to do more than just swing. You need to think. Every move must have a purpose. Every strike must count. Olivia nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. The fear that had gnawed at her earlier was still there. But now, it was mixed with something else, a determination to protect the boy who had become her responsibility. Adrien was watching her from the corner of the room, his wide eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. Olivia knew that this battle wasn't just about her own survival. It was about ensuring that Adrien had a future, that he would be safe from the Inquisitors and whatever they wanted from him. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him. And with that thought, she squared her shoulders and raised the sword again, ready to fight, ready to do whatever it took to keep Adrien safe. The Vampire King stepped back, allowing her space. That's the spirit, he said, his voice more approving. Now, let's work on your stance. You'll need to be quick and decisive when the time comes. There's no room for hesitation in battle. Only survival. Olivia nodded, steeling herself. She would survive. She had to. For Adrien. The weight of what she was about to face hit her again, but she pushed it aside. There was no turning back now. She would fight, she would protect, and she would win, no matter the cost. The days leading up to the Inquisitors' arrival were filled with relentless training, but Olivia felt a growing unease despite her increasing skill. The sword felt more natural in her hands now, each swing sharper, more controlled, but the weight of her responsibility still pressed on her. Adrien remained at her side, his quiet presence a constant reminder of why she had to be strong. She had promised to protect him, no matter what. The Vampire King's words echoed in her mind, his voice cold and unyielding as he'd told her to be ruthless. But how could she? She had never been a killer, never had the instinct for violence. Yet now, with the Inquisitors looming ever closer, she knew she would have to embrace that side of herself if she wanted to keep Adrien safe. The night before the storm was to hit, the castle was unnaturally quiet. Olivia stood at the window of her room, looking out over the grounds, the darkened landscape stretching into the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. In the distance, she saw a flash of light, a flicker of movement in the darkness. She stiffened, heart pounding, her instincts screaming that something was coming. Adrien had gone to bed hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to sleep. She wasn't sure why, but she felt like she needed to be ready to fight. She turned away from the window and walked toward the door. Her hand hovered over the handle, but just as she was about to open it, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. She paused, listening. The door opened, and the Vampire King stepped inside. His eyes met hers, his face as impassive as ever, but there was a tension in his posture. "It's time," he said simply. Olivia nodded, the fear she had been holding back finally surfacing. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice hard, though not unkind. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I don't know if I can do this." He studied her for a moment before answering. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've trained for this. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. We fight together." His words were meant to reassure her, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled deep in her chest. She had seen the way he operated. Cold, ruthless, and unflinching. Was that what it would take to survive? To keep Adrien safe? She had no answers, only the raw, gnawing fear that the world as she knew it was about to fall apart. They made their way down the hallway, the Vampire King leading the way. Olivia's steps were steady, though her heart raced in her chest. As they reached the central courtyard, she saw Adrien standing in the distance, his small frame silhouetted against the rising moonlight. His expression was a mixture of fear and confusion, and for a moment, Olivia felt a pang of guilt. Was she doing the right thing? She was about to take part in something much bigger than herself, something she had no control over. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and she wasn't sure she was ready to pay the price. The Vampire King motioned for her to join him. "They'll be here soon," he said, his voice grim. "When they come, we stand our ground. We don't give them an inch." Olivia nodded, gripping the sword in her hand tighter, though it felt heavier now than ever. The moonlight glinted off the blade, a cold reminder of the battle that was coming. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with anticipation. The Inquisitors were coming. She had no idea what they were capable of, but she knew one thing. She had to be ready to face them, no matter the cost. She turned to Adrien, whose eyes were wide with fear. He took a step toward her, his hands trembling. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small. Olivia knelt down beside him, pushing aside her own fears. "Yes," she said, her voice steady though her heart ached. "We'll be okay." Adrien clung to her, and for a moment, she could feel the weight of his trust. She wasn't sure if she could live up to it, but she would die trying. The Vampire King's voice cut through the silence, breaking the moment. "Get ready," he said, his tone sharp. "They're close." Olivia felt a cold shiver run through her as the air seemed to thicken around her. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. And though she had no idea what was to come, she knew one thing for certain. She would protect Adrien, no matter what. She would face the Inquisitors, and she would fight for the boy who had become her world. The battle for his life, and for her own, was about to begin. The air in the courtyard was thick with anticipation. Olivia could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, the chill of it creeping into her bones. The sounds of the castle were distant now, swallowed up by the quiet that preceded the storm. The Vampire King stood next to her, his figure a shadow in the dim moonlight, his eyes scanning the horizon. Adrien was still close by, his small hand tightly gripping Olivia's, his fear palpable, but so was his trust in her. She could feel his pulse quicken as they waited for the inevitable. They had prepared as best as they could. Olivia had trained, and though she still felt unprepared, there was no turning back now. The Inquisitors would be coming for Adrien, and it was up to her to keep him safe. "Are you ready?" The Vampire King's voice broke through her thoughts. Olivia nodded, though her heart was pounding. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, but inside, she felt anything but. The Vampire King didn't respond, his gaze still focused on the darkness before them. He had been cold, distant even, but Olivia knew that. He was more than capable. He had fought and survived for centuries. She, on the other hand, was still learning, but she was learning fast. Adrien tugged on her sleeve, his voice barely a whisper. "Will they hurt us?" The question broke Olivia's heart. She kneeled in front of him, brushing his hair out of his face. "No," she said firmly, though she couldn't entirely guarantee it. "I won't let them hurt you. I promise." His small hand reached out to hers, his fingers trembling. She held it tight, willing him to believe her, though the doubt in her own heart was hard to shake. In the distance, Olivia could hear the faint sound of approaching footsteps. Her pulse quickened, the sound growing louder, sharper. The Inquisitors were close. The Vampire King straightened, his posture shifting into one of readiness. "Stay close to me," he ordered. And when the time comes, fight. The words hung in the air, cold and unforgiving. She wasn't sure she was capable of fighting like he wanted, but she would have to. For Adrien, she would do anything. They stood together, the tension thick between them. The ground felt like it was vibrating beneath their feet, and Olivia's grip on her sword tightened. Her knuckles were white from the strain. Her heart pounded in her chest. The shadows shifted, and for a brief moment, Olivia thought she saw figures moving in the darkness. But the moment passed, and the castle courtyard remained eerily silent once again. Then, suddenly, a figure stepped into view, cloaked in darkness. The Inquisitors had arrived. There were more of them than Olivia had anticipated, their forms shifting and flowing in the night, like wraiths. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling, unnatural light. They were beings of power, of malice, and they came for Adrien. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as they approached, their eyes locking onto her and Adrien. She could feel their power, their dark presence, wrapping around her like a suffocating fog. She instinctively stepped in front of Adrien, holding the sword before her, though she knew it wouldn't be enough to stop them. "You're too late," the Vampire King's voice rang out, cold and commanding. The Inquisitors paused, their eyes flickering with curiosity. "He's already under my protection." One of the figures, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His voice was like ice, cutting through the tension. "You cannot protect him forever," the Inquisitor said. "The boy's power belongs to us." Olivia's grip on the sword tightened. She didn't understand what they meant by Adrien's power, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let them take him. "Not while I'm here," she said, her voice filled with a confidence she hadn't known she had. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed, and a low chuckle rippled through the group. "You think you can stop us?" another voice said, a mocking tone laced with venom. "We've seen your kind before." The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes blazing with an intensity that sent a shiver through Olivia. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, "and you won't leave here with him." The Inquisitors paused, and Olivia could feel the shift in the air, the heavy tension crackling with the threat of violence. She wasn't sure how this was going to play out, but she knew one thing. She had no choice but to fight. She had no choice but to protect Adrien. "Ready yourself," the Vampire King said to her, his voice low. Without another word, he moved forward, his figure a blur of power. The Inquisitors reacted instantly, their dark forms lunging toward him. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The battle for Adrien's life had begun. She took a step forward, her sword raised. She wasn't just protecting him anymore. She was fighting for their survival, for the future, for everything they had left. And with that thought, Olivia's resolve hardened. She would fight. She would survive. And no matter what, she would never let them take Adrien. The air crackled with tension as the Inquisitors surged forward, their dark forms moving with terrifying speed. Olivia's heart raced as she gripped the sword tighter, her knuckles turning white. The Vampire King moved like a shadow, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as he engaged the first Inquisitor. The sound of steel clashing against steel echoed through the courtyard, the metallic ring sharp and jarring. Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears as she stood her ground. Adrien's small, trembling figure was just behind her, and every instinct in her screamed to protect him, to shield him from the chaos unfolding before her. The Inquisitors were fast, their movements fluid and precise, but the Vampire King was a blur of power, effortlessly parrying each strike. With a calm precision that sent shockwaves of awe through Olivia. She had never seen anyone fight like this before. The Vampire King was ancient, powerful, and utterly unstoppable. And yet, Olivia knew that even his strength couldn't guarantee their victory. The Inquisitors were relentless, and there were more of them than she had imagined. The cold, calculating gaze of the leader, who had spoken to her earlier, locked onto her. His eyes flickered with dark amusement, as if he had already won. Without warning, he lunged toward her, his movements swift and deadly. Olivia barely managed to raise her sword in time to block his strike, the force of it almost knocking her off balance. Her heart raced as she parried, the weight of the blade feeling heavier with each passing second. This was it. She was in the fight for her life, and every moment could be her last. Her mind raced, but the Vampire King's training flooded her thoughts. Every swing had a purpose. Every move counted. With a surge of adrenaline, Olivia twisted her sword, pushing the Inquisitor back, just enough to give her a moment of respite. But the Inquisitor was quick, recovering almost immediately. He smirked, his voice dripping with malice. "You're more resilient than I thought," he said, his tone mocking. "But in the end, it won't matter. You can't fight us." Olivia's breath hitched, her fear threatening to overtake her, but she steadied herself. She couldn't let him see her doubt. She couldn't afford to show weakness. "I'll fight for him," she said, her voice unwavering. "And I'll protect him." The Inquisitor's smirk faltered for just a moment, his eyes narrowing as he raised his sword to strike again. But before he could move, the Vampire King was upon him. With a speed that seemed impossible, the Vampire King struck, his blade cutting through the air with deadly precision. The Inquisitor was forced to retreat, his expression now one of frustration as he tried to regroup. Olivia didn't have time to watch. The fight was far from over, and every moment mattered. She turned back to Adrien, who was still standing behind her, his wide eyes filled with fear. She could see the worry in his gaze, and it made her heart ache. He had been through so much already, and now he was thrust into the middle of this war. She couldn't protect him from everything, but she could protect him from this. With a final glance at him, she refocused on the battle, her body moving instinctively as she parried another strike from an approaching Inquisitor. The fight raged on, each moment a blur of movement, flashing blades, and the pounding of her heart. Her arms were growing heavy, her body exhausted from the constant combat, but she refused to back down. She wouldn't let them take Adrien. She couldn't. The Vampire King's presence was a constant force, a shield that seemed to push back the darkness. But even his strength couldn't hold back the Inquisitors forever. The leader of the Inquisitors approached again, his movements slow but calculated. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She was alone. The Vampire King was engaged in battle with another foe, and Adrien was vulnerable. The Inquisitor's eyes locked onto hers, his smirk returning. "You think you can protect him?" he sneered. "You're just a girl, a pawn in this game, and you will fall, just like the rest." Olivia's blood ran cold at his words, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her sword raised, ready to face him. "I'm not a pawn," she said, her voice steady. "I'm his protector." With that, she lunged forward, her sword slashing through the air. The Inquisitor blocked with ease, but Olivia didn't hesitate. She attacked again and again, each strike fueled by her determination to protect Adrien, to stop these monsters from taking him. She fought with every ounce of strength she had left, her movements growing more precise, more confident, as the battle wore on. The Inquisitor tried to land a fatal blow, but Olivia was ready. She twisted, dodging the strike, and with a surge of power, she drove her sword into his side. He staggered back, his face twisted in shock. He never expected her to land a hit. He never expected her to fight with the ferocity she had. As the Inquisitor crumpled to the ground, Olivia stood over him, breathing heavily, her body trembling with exhaustion. The fight wasn't over, but this was a victory. She had protected Adrien. She had survived. And no matter what, she would keep fighting. For him. For herself. For the future they both deserved. The battle raged on, the air thick with the sounds of clashing steel and the cries of the fallen. Olivia's body was exhausted, her muscles screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Adrien was still behind her, safe for now, but she knew that it wouldn't be long before the Inquisitors regrouped and came after him again. The Vampire King fought with a ferocity that was almost terrifying, his movements fluid and precise, but even he could only do so much. There were too many of them. She had seen the leader fall, but there were others, more Inquisitors lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance. Her sword felt heavy in her hands, the weight of it a constant reminder of the battle she was fighting. She had fought for Adrien, fought for their survival, but now she was beginning to feel the toll it was taking. Blood stained her clothes, sweat poured down her face, and still, she fought. But with each passing moment, the fight seemed more hopeless. The Inquisitors weren't stopping, and neither was the pain. Olivia turned to check on Adrien, her heart skipping a beat when she saw him, his eyes wide with terror. He was standing in the distance, watching her, waiting for her to finish this. She could see the fear in his eyes, and it only made her fight harder. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice hoarse. but Adrien didn't move. He couldn't understand the danger. He couldn't see what she was facing. But Olivia did. She knew that if the Inquisitors got to him, it would be over. With a cry of determination, she charged forward, cutting through the remaining Inquisitors with a strength she didn't know she had. Her sword moved faster now, sharper, more precise, as if the desperation of the moment had unlocked something deep within her. She could hear the Vampire King's voice in her mind, urging her to push forward. Fight for him, he had said. Fight for the future. And in that moment, Olivia understood. It wasn't just about surviving the battle. It was about giving Adrien a future. She fought harder, faster, with everything she had. The Inquisitors fell before her, one after another, until there were only a few left. But those few were strong, their movements calculated and deadly. Olivia's heart raced as she faced the last of them, her body shaking with exhaustion, but she couldn't let them win. Not now. Not when she had come so far. The final Inquisitor lunged at her, his sword aimed directly for her heart, but Olivia was ready. She sidestepped, her body moving instinctively, and in one swift motion, she drove her sword into his side. The Inquisitor staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. Olivia stood over him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He fell to the ground with a thud, and for a moment, the courtyard was still. Silence. Olivia looked around, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The fight was over. The Inquisitors had been defeated, but the victory felt hollow. Adrien was safe, but she had no idea what came next. She turned toward him, her heart in her throat. He was standing there, watching her, his face pale with fear but filled with awe. Olivia couldn't help but smile, despite the exhaustion weighing her down. She had done it. She had protected him, and she had survived. The Vampire King approached her, his gaze steady as he took in the scene. His eyes softened ever so slightly as he looked at Olivia. "You did it," he said, his voice quiet but filled with approval. Olivia didn't know how to respond. She had fought with everything she had, but now, standing amidst the wreckage of the battle, she wasn't sure what came next. The Vampire King stepped closer, his presence imposing. "You're more than just a protector now," he said, his tone deep and serious. "You've proven yourself." Olivia shook her head, exhaustion making it hard to focus. "I didn't do it alone," she said, glancing down at Adrien, who was still standing there, waiting for her. "He's the reason I fought." The Vampire King looked at Adrien, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said, his voice softening. "He is." There was a long silence as the two of them stood there, the weight of everything that had happened hanging in the air. Olivia didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had given everything to protect Adrien. She had fought for him, for the future that was still uncertain. And somehow, in the chaos of it all, she had found a new strength, one she didn't know she had. The Vampire King turned to her, his gaze steady. "You've proven that you are more than capable. But remember, this is just the beginning. There will be more battles ahead." Olivia nodded, her sword still in her hand. She was exhausted, every muscle in her body aching. But there was a fire inside her now, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. She had protected Adrien, and she would continue to do so, no matter what came next. "I'll be ready," she said quietly, "for whatever comes." The Vampire King nodded, a rare flicker of approval in his eyes. As the two of them stood there, with Adrien by her side, Olivia knew that the fight was far from over. But for the first time, she felt like she had a chance. A chance to protect the boy she loved, and a chance to build a future, no matter how uncertain it might be.